Hello there, my name is Florian, and in this video I want to show you how Fantomas handles conditional compiler directives. To explain this concept, we'll solve a related bug. The problem here is that our defines are obviously messed up and we're even missing an attribute. If we look at this in the AST tool, we can see that if we format without any compiler defines, we'll just get the exclude from code coverage, which makes sense because this is then hitting the else branch. If we say that net2 is one of our defines we can pass to the F# checker, the generated AST will have a different attribute, being the exclude from code coverage. So we end up with a difference in AST trees. And in short, what Fantomas does, it will try and format all possible scenarios and then merge everything back in together. Let's switch to a unit test to see this in action. So I have this same code example in here. If we debug this, we can see that we have two AST trees. The difference will then be in the attributes, of course. And then we hit context.create twice for each define. So in this case, we have one define being the net2. In the second case, we will have no defines being the other case. Then the AST was formatted. And if we look at the result of one of the expressions, you can actually already see this is wrong. If you look at the other one, we see that we have a similar problem. So the end if is on the wrong place in two cases. So basically, the merging of this will also lead to an invalid result. Conditional directives themselves are trivia, since we can't find them in the AST tree. So let's use the trivia tool to see what we're dealing with here. So at first glance, we see that the content before of the attribute, in this case, we're looking at the branch where no defines are in play. So we're hitting the else case. We're having a new line, then a directive, then another new line. So in this case, there's no attribute if there are no defines. And then we have the else, and that's above the attribute, to then later have the content before, the end if, before the syn module declaration types. So at first glance, this actually looks pretty okay. However, I do notice something strange with the range of the types. So if you look at this leaf, we can see that it goes from 10 to line 14. Looking back at the AST viewer, we can see that we have types over here. Types are indeed from 10, if you look at the entire types, from 10 to 14. But even if you look at the attributes inside a component information of a type definition, it contains our attribute. In this case, it is net2 is defined, so it's the prog ID attribute. That is on line 6. So the children here of the type definition are actually the range is not necessarily inside of the range of the parents. This is a problem because when traversing the tree in CodePrinter, we will call genTrivia first with the range of the type instead of the attributes. I'm going to set a breakpoint in gen model declaration to illustrate this. So if we hit here, our node case will match types. And the expression here is being passed to genTrivia. We'll notice what this range is. Let's start the unit test again. So we see that our node here has that range of 10 to 14. So the content before of that was the hash and if. So looking back, we're having this guy right here. So it will print content before, and whatever expression that comes out of this will be passed to genTrivia. We noticed from the last video, genTrivia first does enter node, so it will first print our hash and if, then it will print the entire expression to format the types, and then it will go into leave nodes. Now the problem here, within inside F, the attributes will be printed as well. So there's a bit of a mismatch over there. If we go back to our unit tests, we can But let's do something first. When we use format string, we'll always get in that scenario where if we debug, it's going to do all the possible cases, but it can lead to a bit of a headache because if you're following down, if you're debugging, you always need to know what scenario am I going, what are my defines. So we can write a slight variation of this test that will actually only format with the defines we pass in here. In this case, we're passing no defines, so we know that we are going to print this attribute. We're going to print one AST tree, and this is going to be easier to solve the problem because I'm fairly sure that the problem is going to be the same for both cases. The solution to this problem is to link the directive trivia to the content after of the attribute instead of the content before the types declaration. So switching back here, if the end if was just the content after of the attribute, it will all be printed accordingly. So the normal sort of guidance or rule when assigning trivia to trivia nodes is that you basically want to try and assign as much as possible trivia to content before of elements because that generally works better. But in this case, we're having some sort of an edge case that if we have an attribute over here and then a type definition after it, the endif should be linked to the attribute instead of the type definition. So let's go to the trivia module where this is assigned. All right. If I look at the add trivia to trivia node, we matched trivia. If the trivia is a directive over here, the first thing we do is we try and find the node with a helper function, trivia between attribute and let binding. This is actually a problem that we already encountered in Fantomas. If you have something like this, where you have an attribute, you have then the hash if bar and the let binding, the same problem happens. The hash directive should be linked to the attribute instead of the let binding. So in this function, a check is being done. I'm not going to go into the details, but what we want here is to extend the cases where this behavior should occur. And what we'll need is we'll need to say the syn module declaration.types when that range, the exact same condition, when that is true, so this is our exact case we have, then if this let binding and this attribute is found and the ranges match up, then it should take the attribute. So I'm just brushing over this. You can look at it in more detail. Just kind of go with it. Okay, so this helper function has been altered. I'll put a breakpoint over here. We'll see that the node is going to be attributes and it will be added to the content after. So debugging this now. Okay. You can see that the end if is now being assigned to the syn attribute list. If you look at this, it already has content before, which is a new line, the if, the blank line, else, and then content after will be the end if. Now this won't generate any trivia anymore before it. And if we go and see what our test did, it succeeded this time. So let's do the other case. I'm fairly sure that the other scenario will just be the exact same problem. So if we run this, okay, that works as well. And now lastly, to wrap up, I can run my original test again. If we debug this, we can see that both results now look much better. We have if attribute else end if. We have if else attribute end if. And if this will be merged, then it will end up being the correct source code. So our unit test succeeded. Okay, to summarize this video, Fantomas processes all possible code paths defined by conditional compiler directives and merges them back together. AST nodes can have children with ranges outside the node of the parents. Trivia items sometimes require specific assignment to trivia nodes, otherwise you get weird messed up things like we had with the and if directive. I hope you enjoyed this video and please let me know if you want to see anything else. Keep on formatting. Cheers.